Handcuffs snapped tight around Michael Carter's wrists as two veteran detectives dragged him across the Riverside police garage, unaware he was their new chief of police. Determined to reform a department scarred by racism and secrecy, Michael now faced his first battle from inside his own station. Would he turn this humiliating arrest into the spark that forces an entire force to change? If this true story grips you, like and share it so more people can witness how one man's courage can transform a whole department. Now let's step into the moment it all began. I remember the light first, that thin steel gray wash you only get on a Chicago fall morning when the lake looks like hammered metal and the wind tastes like coin. I stood in the hotel bathroom with my dress, whites on, smoothing the front with my palm, feeling the weight of the silver badge sit over my heart. 48 years old, 25 in uniform, and my hands still shook when I pinned a new insignia. Not fear electricity, the kind that tells you the next step matters. I looked myself in the mirror and saw two faces. One was the kid who started on midnights on the West Side Black. Eager watched twice as hard and believed half as much. The other was the man Chicago had made calm when it counted, stubborn when it mattered, quick to say, slow down, when adrenaline begged for speed. Every lesson I'd earned in those years, traffic stops that got loud for no reason, mothers in kitchen doorways wringing dish towels the way a street quiets after sirens fade, crowded in behind the glass. I could hear my old field training officer in my head, observe first, judgment later. That was the best thing he ever gave me. My phone buzzed, cutting through the mirror noise. Rachel's name lit the screen. She never used speaker in a hotel, said the walls were too thin for private talk. "You up?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm up," I said. The city hummed outside the window, garbage truck, bus brakes, a horn. Someone held a second too long. She didn't start with congratulations. She knew me better. "Remember the thing you tell your rookies?" I smiled, feeling it in my shoulders before my mouth. "Observe before you act." "That's right," she said. Then softer, "I believe in you, Michael. Just keep your eyes open today." There was more inside those words than blessing. It was warning, stitched to love. We'd both seen chiefs arrive with brass bands and leave with scandal. We'd both watched good officers get bent out of shape by a culture that rewarded the wrong reflexes. She was telling me to treat day one like a crime scene. Don't touch anything until you've seen enough to tell the truth. "I will," I said. "I love you. I love you." A breath. "Call me after you're observing." We hung up. I let the room be quiet again. On the table sat a neatly folded dress cap, a printed schedule for the noon ceremony, a small envelope from the mayor's office with some talking points I wouldn't use. I slid the cap under my arm, left the envelope where it was, and walked out. The hotel lobby was warm with coffee, air, and old carpet. Outside, the day was crisp enough to make me stand a little taller. I didn't bring a motorcade. I didn't call the PIO to coordinate a photo at the front doors. If I was going to lead Riverside, I needed to meet it without a spotlight, just a man walking into a building where men like me had too often been treated like intruders. That was the point of the plan. I drove myself, a black sedan that still smelled faintly of factory glue and leather polish. The GPS knew the route to Riverside PD like it knew every government address, blue dot, gray line. Little caution about morning congestion near the river. I ignored it. I've always preferred to drive by feel when I need to think. The highway slid under me in long, steady lanes. The skyline fell back. Billboards gave way to brick and low glass. On the way, I reviewed what mattered. 3 civil suits for excessive force in 5 years, 2 settled in 7 figures. Complaints outpacing commendations by a margin that said, "System not bad, weak." Neighborhoods that didn't dial 911 unless someone was bleeding because they didn't trust who might answer. None of that lives on a spreadsheet. It lives in the muscle of a department, in how people talk at roll call, how they write a report when they decide to roll their shoulders and escalate. You can't fix it with a memo and a new slogan. You fix it by finding out what reflex the place has been teaching and then retraining it one decision at a time. The closer I got, the quieter it felt inside the car. Not the radio off, not the road still a low tire hum. Quiet like when you're standing just outside a doorway, counting your own breaths. I turned onto a service street behind the main building because that's where truth tends to hide in the back, next to the dumpsters and the smoking bench where nobody thinks the boss will walk. Riverside's headquarters looked newer than its habits. Fresh glass, fresh sealant lines, a mural out front about community and courage, with bright handprints at child height. Around back, the paint dulled to municipal beige. A sign read, "Employees only." I tapped my card through the reader, out of habit even though no one had activated it yet. Old reflex ask, before you take. The gate jerked, buzzed, and lifted anyway. Someone had forgotten to program the schedule. I eased the car down the slope. The garage took me like a breath taken through clenched teeth, lights flickering, concrete damp in stripes where the night had condensed and bled down the walls. A coffee smell hung low, old and bitter, braided with oil and cold steel. Somewhere farther in a radio leaked talk show laughter and an ad for discount tires. My headlamp cut across rows of personal cars, and black and white some washed some salted white from yesterday's rain. On a windshield to my left, I saw 3 unpaid parking tickets tucked under a wiper blade curling at the edges. Habits again? I parked near a column with a yellow number 3 stenciled on it and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than the car. Through the windshield, I watched an officer shrug into a jacket at the far door and disappear up a stairwell. Another stood near a patrol unit with the hood up, talking to someone I couldn't see, voice low and flat the way cops talk when they don't think anyone is listening. I could have gone around to the lobby like a guest. I could have called up to the lieutenant's office and asked for an escort. Instead, I sat one more beat and listened. Rachel's words came back, "Keep your eyes open. Observe before you act." I took off the cap and set it on the passenger seat. No point advertising. I slid my phone into the inside pocket, patted the badge where it rested, and felt the familiar press through the cloth. Remember who you are? I told myself, not as a pep talk, as an anchor. A title can make a man loud. A purpose makes him steady. The door hinges creaked when I opened it. The air bit my cheeks. My shoes clicked once, twice on the concrete, and then the sound blended with the garage's own pulse vent, fans adrip somewhere in the dark, the faint squeal of a belt under a hood. I walked the way you walk into a room where you don't yet know the rules, shoulders squared, hands, visible eyes, soft but busy. From here on, I'd let the place tell me what it was. You can learn a lot in 5 minutes if you stop trying to be seen and start watching. Who parks crooked and who lines up straight? Which lockers have jokes taped inside them and which stay bare? Where the tired anger lives, where the quiet pride does too. At the bottom of the stairs, a poster flapped against a corkboard in the draft. Community night block, letters, a date already passed. I reached to press the thumbtack in and let it go. Not my job yet. Not like this. Headlights swept across the far wall as another unit rolled in. Voices closer now. A metal door banged open somewhere above me. I could feel the department's habits breathing around me, old and automatic. I took one more breath of that coffee and steel air, the kind you never forget once you've had it in your lungs. Then I stepped deeper into the garage, into the dim, where the first truth of Riverside was waiting to meet me. The first voice hit me before the faces did, hard clipped and used to getting its way. Hands where I can see them. Now. I turned slowly, palms up and out the way you do, when a bad guess is already rolling downhill. 2 men came out of the shadow between pillars, shoulders forward, jackets open over holsters. The tall one wore the kind of scowl you get from 10,000 interviews. The shorter one moved like a spring you keep too tight. Mason Cole and Ryan Diaz. I didn't know their names yet, but I knew the type. Cole's eyes raked me like I was a dent he'd have to write up. "You lost," he said, voice low, meaning the edges. "No," I answered. "I'm exactly where I meant to be." Diaz slid to my right, cutting the angle. His hand hovered near his weapon, not touching, but close enough to say he could. "ID, now." "In my inside pocket," I said. Cole took a half step closer. Coffee and cigarettes came with him. "Don't move," he warned. "We'll do the honors." He reached slow on purpose, like he wanted time to decide if this was going to be a story he told later. He patted down my jacket, found nothing he liked, and squared up again. "What are you doing in our garage?" Diaz asked. I repeated, not because I didn't understand, but because sometimes the echo tells you more than the question. I kept my hands high. The concrete under my shoes felt damp, slick with that garage sweat you can't mop up. Cole's mouth tilted into something between a grin and a baring of teeth. "Answer the question," he said. "You know before this gets unnecessary." I watched his thumb find the snap on his holster. The move was clean, thoughtless muscle memory, married to a bias he didn't know he was carrying like a second badge. I didn't feel fear so much as disappointment, the dull, familiar kind you get when a test comes in exactly the shape you predicted. I work here, I said. He snorted. Sure you do. Diaz looked me up and down, landing hard on my skin like it was evidence. You picked the wrong lot to hustle, my friend. Hands stay up, Cole said again. Then louder. Turn around. Is that necessary? I asked. It is if you like your shoulder sockets, Diaz said, already moving. I turned. Cold metal kissed my wrists. The click when the cuffs shut is always the same bright, final, a little too loud for the space it's in. It rang off the concrete and made the flickering lights feel harsher. Cole cinched them with that little extra tug men give when they want you to know who's writing the script. Walk, he said. They shoved me across the bay past a patrol unit with the hood up and a beat-up sedan with a cracked Blue Lives sticker peeling off the bumper. Past a camera with a dead red light. Past a hand-lettered sign about a charity softball game dated 3 months ago. Every small thing was a sentence and a paragraph about how this place lived when nobody was looking. We took the back stairs, metal treads, hard echoes, then a short hall where a bulletin board sagged under memos no one had read. A door buzzed. The room waited. Interview 3 was all the same rooms I've ever known, tables scarred by rings and keys, 2 molded chairs, 1 camera eye in the corner, blinking like it might mean it. They sat me down with more force than gravity required. Cole took the chair across from me. Diaz posted at the door. Cole leaned back just enough to say he was comfortable. Name, he said. You first, I said. He laughed. It wasn't kind. How many garages like this have you sneaked into? I let the question hang until I could hear the hum of the vent. How many black men, I asked, have you handcuffed in this garage just for standing in the wrong place? Diaz's chair squeaked. Cole's eyes narrowed, not wounded, not even angry yet. Calculating. He wanted to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. Play cute, he said. See where that gets you. I'm not playing, I said. I'm asking for your experience. Diaz pushed off the door and came around my flank. He planted his hands on the table and leaned in until I could see the tiny crack in his front tooth. You're not the one asking questions, Ryan Cole said without looking at him. His voice carried a quiet reprimand, the kind partners use when they've rehearsed this dance too many times. Diaz held my eyes a second longer than he needed to, then straightened and went back to the door. On the wall above his shoulder, a policy poster about bias-free policing was curling away from the paint. Cole folded his hands. Here's how this works, he said. You tell me who you are, who you're here to see, and why you're in a restricted area. You do it clean, and maybe you walk out. You get clever, and we'll take our time. Who decides which is which, I asked. He smiled. You don't want to find out. He asked the same questions 3 different ways. He wanted me to contradict myself the way you circle a suspect until he trips over his own story. I gave him the same answers, 3 different tones, calm, calmer, calmest. Not to provoke, to observe. The tape would matter later, not for a complaint, but for a lesson. Between questions, he watched me the way a man watches a dog he doesn't trust, ready to kick if it twitches wrong. The room smelled like old coffee and lemon cleaner that never quite reached the corners. On the table, a groove shaped like a paperclip had been worried into the top by 1,000 impatient hands. I let my gaze land on it, then on the camera, then back to Cole's tie, frayed near the knot. People carry their habits where they think no one will notice. You know what I think, he said finally. I'm listening. I think you're running a story, he said. Maybe you've got a buddy upstairs, maybe you don't. But you picked the wrong uniform to pretend in and the wrong building to try it. I'm not pretending, I said. I told you, I work here. He leaned forward until the chair creaked, doing what I let a beat pass, long enough to make him feel the shape of the silence, not long enough to turn it into a dare. That'll be clear soon, Diaz rolled his eyes. He's fishing. Cole didn't take his gaze off me. You know what I see when I look at you? I'm curious, I said. I see a man who thinks rules are suggestions, he said. I see a man who thinks he can walk past a sign and into a secured space and then talk his way out like the rules are for other people. That's one way to read it, I said. Another is, I see a man who thinks his hunch is proof. His mouth twitched. Not a smile. A tell. He didn't like the mirror I'd put up. He drummed his fingers once on the tabletop, then flattened his hand like he could erase the gesture. "Look at me," he said. "I am." "No," he said softer. "Look." So I did. I took him in the shaved jaw shadow that said morning had started early, the nick on his knuckle, the pale groove a wedding ring had worn and recently vacated, the crease between his brows that never unclenched, and behind it all the tired I've seen in too many cops, not from hours, from years. Years of being told the world will hurt you if you don't hit first. "I see you," I said. "Do you?" Diaz shifted again, restless. "Enough," he said. "Charge him with trespass and obstruction." "For what?" I asked, genuinely. "Refusing to identify yourself," Diaz shot back. "I told you," I said. "You just don't like the answer." Cole's patience thinned, but his eyes were bright now. He enjoyed this. Not the racism, he'd never call it that. Not even in the private room of his head, but the sport, the power, the sense that he could control the story by keeping it small enough to fit between his palms. "Last chance," he said. I lifted my cuffed hands a fraction, let the steel glint catch the camera's blink. "You ever wonder," I asked, "what this looks like from outside the room?" He blinked. It was quick, but it was there. He wasn't used to people narrating his part back to him. "Here's what I know," I said. "You're good at your job. You're careful. You've done this 1,000 times. And somewhere along the way, you started believing that your first read was the right one, because it usually was. But usually isn't always." "You done," Diaz said. "Almost," I said. I looked at Cole. "You want to know who I am? You will. And when you do, I'd like you to remember how this felt." The room settled around that line like dust. Cole sat very still. Diaz's jaw worked. From the hallway outside came the squeak of a cartwheel and the low murmur of voices, ordinary life, moving just beyond our wall. I took a slow breath and let it out. I wasn't here to win a cleverness contest. I was here to see. To gather the way a good cop does before he writes it down. The valence of the voice, the casual hand near the gun, the way our slips into a sentence about a public building, a dead camera eye, a poster past its date, little things that add up to a big why. Cole tapped the table twice with his finger, made a decision, and stood. "Stay put," he said, like the cuffs were optional. He nodded at Diaz and moved for the door. As it clicked behind him, I looked up at the camera again, blink, pause, blink, and thought of Rachel's voice in my ear. "Observe before you act." I was cuffed, yes, but I wasn't helpless. I was learning, and everything I was learning in that room would have a use before the day was done. The door opened without a knock, and a colder draft of hallway light cut across the table. Cole came back in first, a tablet in his hand, eyes locked on the screen, as if he could will it to rewrite itself. Diaz followed slower, the cocky lean gone from his shoulders. Cole set the tablet down but didn't sit. His mouth opened shut, opened again. Finally, he cleared his throat, the sound dry and hard. "There's been a mistake," he said. I watched him silent. You learn more by letting a man wrestle his own words. Diaz shifted his weight, the metal door clanging softly against his back. "Sir," he blurted, then stopped, the word hanging in the air like it had startled even him. Cole slid the tablet across the table. The screen glowed in the dim light. My own photo stared back at me, department issue, sharp and formal. Name Michael Carter, position Chief of Police, Riverside Metropolitan Police Department. Below that, a tight stack of commendations from the governor, the Justice Department, and a career that no amount of suspicion could erase. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. The humming vent, the ticking camera, even Diaz's restless shoes seemed to go still. Cole's jaw worked once, twice. "Chief," he managed the word landing like gravel. "Chief Carter." I let the title settle between us. Then I spoke even steady. "So now you know who I am." Diaz's face went pale. "Sir, He caught himself, the apology tangling with disbelief. Before he could find the rest of his sentence, the door opened again. Lieutenant Grace Kim stepped in crisp and composed, her eyes sharp enough to read the room in a blink. She took in the cuffs on my wrist, the tablet on the table, the two men frozen where bravado had been minutes ago. "Good morning, Chief Carter," she said, voice clear and formal. The words cracked the silence like a gavel. Cole flinched. Diaz's head dropped. Grace crossed the room unhurried. I apologize for the delay in meeting you, she continued. I came as soon as I heard. I raised my cuffed hands just enough to draw her glance. She nodded once and turned to Cole. Sergeant, remove those now. Cole fumbled with the key. The cuffs clicked open, the sound almost gentle compared to the metallic snap that had trapped me. I flexed my wrists, feeling the blood return. Grace's expression softened as she looked back to me. Chief, It's fine, I said, and I meant it more than she expected. Then I turned to Cole and Diaz. Both men looked like the floor might swallow them if they stood still long enough. You two have given me something I couldn't have gotten in a dozen welcome meetings, I said quietly. A real picture of how this department breathes when no one's watching. More than any briefing book, more than any press conference. Cole's eyes flickered with something between shame and curiosity. Diaz swallowed Adam's apple, bobbing hard. I came here early to see the truth, I continued. And you showed it to me. Grace shifted slightly as if waiting for the hammer to fall. Discipline, suspension, a formal complaint. But that wasn't the lesson I wanted. This isn't about ending your careers, I said. It's about starting a better one. What you did this morning is exactly what too many citizens feel when they meet us. I intend to change that, and I expect you to help me do it. No one spoke. The vent hummed back to life. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang and stopped. Finally, Cole drew a slow breath. Chief, He stopped again, then squared his shoulders. I understand. Diaz managed a small, stiff nod. I stood. Grace fell in beside me, a quiet ally. As we stepped into the hallway, she whispered, Chief, I can file formal discipline. What happened in there was inexcusable. I shook my head. No paperwork today. I'll handle this myself. Her brows lifted. May I ask why? Because this isn't about punishment, I said. It's about culture. And culture changes when people feel the weight of their choices, not just the weight of a memo. She exhaled slowly. Understood. We walked past the bulletin board with its curling flyers and past officers who stiffened as they realized who I was. Behind us in interview 3, Cole and Diaz were left with the sound of their own breathing and the memory of every word. That morning had begun with cold steel on my wrists. Now it carried something sharper, a blueprint. The department had shown me unfiltered the instincts I would need to reshape. Every look, every command, every snap of a cuff was a line in the plan for change. As Grace led me toward the main floor, I felt no triumph, only clarity. This wasn't the end of a misunderstanding. It was the start of the real work, the reform I had promised myself, my family, and every citizen who deserved a police force they could trust. The briefing room held the kind of silence that makes every breath feel borrowed. Rows of uniforms filled the long tables, blue cloth against white walls, nameplates catching the fluorescent glare. Nobody fidgeted. Nobody whispered. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector that wasn't even turned on. I walked to the front with Grace Kim at my side. Behind the podium, the Riverside Police crest seemed to weigh twice as much as when I'd seen it on paper. I let the silence stay long enough to matter long enough for every officer to feel the room lean forward. Good morning, I said at last, my voice carried without a mic. My name is Michael Carter. I am your new chief of police. A few heads nodded. Most stayed perfectly still. I rested both hands on the podium and let my eyes travel the room. That's when I found Sergeant Frank Bradley. 32 years on the job, shoulders squared like a wall haircut to regulation tightness. His face was unreadable, except for the eyes gray cold, the kind of cold that doesn't melt. He didn't blink. If there was a welcome in him, it was buried under decades of habit. I began where I'd planned to begin. Riverside will no longer be a department that measures success only by arrests or citations. Our measure will be trust. Every life in this city matters, every color, every neighborhood, every call. The words dropped into the stillness like stones into deep water. I've read the reports, I continued. I know the lawsuits, the broken relationships, the corners of this city where people dial 911 only when they have no choice because they don't trust who might show up. That changes today. From this day forward, we will serve first and enforce second. We will listen before we act. We will protect every life with the same urgency we protect our own. A chair creaked somewhere in the back. I looked that way and saw Officer Miguel Rodriguez, a young patrolman I'd met briefly in the hall. He lifted his chin and said clear enough to reach the back wall. "That's what we need, Chief." It was the sound of a single match struck in a dark room. A few more nods followed, tentative but real. Then came the countercurrent. To my left, a knot of older sergeants sat with arms folded. No movement, just a thin shared smile that wasn't warmth at all. It was the quiet dare of men who had outlasted other chiefs and intended to outlast me. Bradley's lips moved almost imperceptibly. Maybe a whisper to the man next to him, maybe just a breath that carried a message. Let's see how long he lasts. I kept my eyes on him. This department will not tolerate excessive force, I said. It will not hide behind closed doors when something goes wrong, and it will not confuse silence for loyalty. Loyalty to the badge means loyalty to the public. For the first time, Bradley blinked, slow, deliberate. A muscle tightened along his jaw, but he said nothing. I let the silence stretch until it nearly broke. Then I closed with what I wanted them to carry out of the room. "We are not here to protect a club," I said. "We are here to protect a community. The change will not be easy, but it will happen with or without applause. And I will be here every day to make sure of it." The room released a collective breath when I stepped back. Some clapped softly. Most stayed stone still. The meeting ended without the usual chatter. Officers filed out in small knots, their conversations low and careful. I thanked those who approached Rodriguez among them and caught fragments of side comments as I moved toward the door. "That'll never fly. Another chief with big speeches. Give it 6 months." From the corner of my eye, I caught Bradley standing slow and deliberate. He didn't come to me. He turned toward the exit phone, already in hand. As he passed through the doorway, I heard the low rumble of his voice, too quiet to catch the words, but heavy with intention. Grace, walking beside me, tilted her head. "You hear that?" I nodded. "Enough." Minutes later, as the hallway emptied, I saw Bradley in the side parking lot through a window. He leaned against his cruiser phone, pressed to his ear, the faintest edge of a smile pulling at his mouth. I couldn't hear the sentence, but I could read the weight of it on his lips. "The new guy will pay for this." It was the kind of sentence you don't need volume to understand. I stood there a moment, the echoes of the meeting still ringing in my chest. The plan I'd carried from Chicago was solid on paper, policies, trainings, metrics, but paper doesn't fight back. Culture does, and culture fights dirty. Grace joined me at the glass. "You expected resistance," she said quietly. "I did," I answered. "But expectation doesn't make it lighter." For the first time that morning, I felt the real shape of the storm. This wasn't a debate over procedures. It was a clash of world's-old habits against new conscience, silence against accountability. I watched Bradley end his call and climb into his car without looking back. The taillights disappeared into daylight, but the threat stayed. Change, I knew, would not be written in policy manuals. It would be carved out in rooms like the one I just left, against men like the one I just watched drive away. The battle for Riverside had begun. The call came just after sunset, slicing through the quiet of my office like a siren in a dream. Chief Carter, the dispatcher, said, voice tight with panic, "Shots fired. Possible officer involved shooting. Juvenile victim. East Side near Crenshaw and 9th. I was on my feet before she finished. By the time I reached the garage, the air outside felt sharper, colder, as if the whole city had sensed the shot. When I arrived, blue and red lights pulsed across wet pavement, turning every drop of rain into a shard of glass. The smell of gunpowder and damp asphalt hung heavy. Yellow tape trembled in the wind. Beyond it, a basketball rolled back and forth in a shallow puddle, untouched, the only thing still moving. A paramedic crouched beside a boy. Marcus Williams, 17, his thin frame folded as if he'd sat down and forgotten to rise. Blood darkened the shoulder of his hoodie. His spotless white sneakers gleamed under the flashing lights. For a heartbeat, the years collapsed. I was 17 again, standing under a Chicago street lamp, while a patrol car slowed a spotlight, pinning me like prey. An officer's hand on his weapon, the order to freeze. The sound of my own pulse, louder than reason. Back then, luck and one calm partner had spared me. Marcus had not been granted that mercy. I stepped closer. "Status," I said. An officer swallowed hard. "Victim is stable for transport. Single gunshot. Shooter is Officer Tom Morrison. Says he thought the kid had a gun. My eyes went to the basketball rocking in its puddle. That I said quietly was the gun. The next hour unfolded in fragments. Marcus lifted onto a stretcher, his mother arriving with a cry that tore through every heart on the block. Neighbors gave hushed statements they'd only seen a boy dribbling home from late practice. I kept my words short orders, not speeches. Secure the scene. Preserve evidence. Separate Officer Morrison. Bag the weapon. By the time we convened in the main briefing room, the command staff sat waiting, a knot of tension barely contained. Grace Kim stood beside me, her face set like stone. Sergeant Frank Bradley sat dead center, arms folded across his chest like a barricade. I didn't ease in. Officer Tom Morrison discharged his weapon at an unarmed teenager carrying a basketball. I said, "The boy is alive. There will be a full criminal investigation and an internal affairs review." Effective immediately, Morrison is relieved of duty. Badge and weapon surrendered. The words landed like hammer blows. A ripple of sharp breaths moved through the room. Bradley pushed back his chair with a scrape that sounded like a challenge. "You're out of line, Chief," he said, his voice filling the space. "You're condemning a fellow officer before the facts are in. You're tearing apart the brotherhood that keeps us alive out there." I met his stare. "I'm saving it." He blinked, thrown for a beat. "You think this saves anyone? What happens when an officer hesitates because he's afraid of losing his badge? Who pays for that?" "Marcus almost paid with his life," I said evenly. "This isn't hesitation. This is accountability. And if our brotherhood depends on silence when a child is shot, it isn't worth saving." The room tightened. No one moved. Bradley leaned forward, knuckles on the table. "You don't know this city yet. You think policy keeps cops safe? It's trust between us that does, and you're breaking it." I took a step closer, lowering my voice until everyone had to lean in. Trust isn't broken by honesty. It's broken by bullets and lies. If we can't tell the truth inside these walls, we can't protect anyone outside them. The silence stretched until even the vent's hum seemed to hold its breath. Grace spoke first, clear and steady. "The order stands. Badge and weapon." Across the table, Morrison sat pale, motionless, his service pistol already sealed in an evidence bag. The reality of immediate public accountability rolled through the room like a cold front. Bradley straightened slowly, eyes never leaving mine. He said nothing more, but his silence had weight. It was the kind of silence that promises a later fight. As the meeting dissolved, I watched a quiet migration. A half-dozen officers, Bradley's closest allies, rose without waiting for adjournment and filed out together, heads bent close. No slamming doors, no raised voices, just a deliberate, wordless exit that spoke louder than any protest. Grace caught my eye. "They'll be the ones," she murmured. I nodded. I didn't need her to explain. Every department has a center of gravity, and when it shifts, you feel it. Bradley's faction wasn't merely angry. They were aligning. I stayed in the room after the others left until only the soft whir of the vending machine filled the silence. The air smelled of burnt coffee and something older, a tension that had lived here for years and now had a name. This wasn't just about one trigger pulled on a rainy night. It was the opening act of a deeper fight, a struggle over what counts as courage, what counts as loyalty, and whether the badge means power or responsibility. The shot fired on Crenshaw Street had echoed far beyond a single neighborhood. It had cracked open the real battle for Riverside, and nothing inside this department would ever sound the same again. The hospital room was dim and hushed, the steady rhythm of machines the only sound until Marcus stirred. I pulled a chair close and rested my hand over his. His fingers twitched, then tightened just enough to let me know he felt me there. When he opened his eyes, they were clearer than I expected. "Chief Carter," he whispered. "I'm here," I said. "Take your time." A faint smile touched his lips. "I don't hate him," he said, the words slow but certain. "Officer Morrison. I just feel sorry for him. He was so scared of a kid with a basketball." The room went very still. Even the monitor seemed to pause between beats. I tightened my grip, humbled by a 17-year-old's grace. His mother sat on the opposite side of the bed, eyes swollen from a night of tears. She reached across Marcus to rest a trembling hand on mine. "Chief," she said softly, "real justice isn't about hurting the man who hurt my boy. It's about making sure no other mother sits where I am now." For a moment, none of us spoke. Outside the closed door, The hospital corridor hummed with ordinary life footsteps, carts the quiet whir of an elevator, but inside the room time felt suspended, as if mercy itself had entered to listen. By morning the story had spread beyond Riverside. News vans lined the street, reporters clustered near the main entrance, their cameras blinking red like restless eyes. Across the country, screens filled with Marcus's photo and the headline, "Teen Survives Police Shooting." Outside the hospital, a crowd swelled, hundreds of neighbor students, church leaders, and strangers, drawn by outrage and hope. Some held candles, others carried signs calling for justice. The air throbbed with chants that rose and broke like waves. I stepped outside to meet them, the night air sharp with the scent of rain and coffee from sidewalk vendors. Faces turned toward me, angry, grieving, expectant. I raised a hand for quiet. "I hear your pain," I said, voice steady but caring. "What happened to Marcus is unacceptable. We will hold the officer accountable, and we will build a department where this cannot happen again. But I ask you, please let our anger build bridges, not fires. Let our grief push us toward change, not chaos." A murmur moved through the crowd, softer now, the edge of violence easing into resolve. People lowered their signs not in surrender, but in a shared decision to keep the protest peaceful. I stood with them until the candles burned low and the chants turned into quiet prayers. Later, back in Marcus's room, I watched him sleep and let the lesson settle. Change built on punishment alone is thin ice. Change built on courage and forgiveness, on hearts willing to confront fear, without becoming fear, is the kind that lasts. Marcus had survived a bullet and answered hate with mercy. His mother had turned anguish into a call for prevention, not revenge. They were showing me better than any policy draft what real reform must rest on. As I left the hospital, dawn lifting pale light over Riverside, I knew the work ahead was larger than investigations and hearings. It was about transforming reflexes one heart at a time, and the first heart to transform had to be the department's own. The call came on a gray Saturday afternoon, shattering a brief calm that had settled over the city. Active shooter, Riverside Mall, multiple casualties. The dispatcher's voice was tight and clipped, the kind of tone you only hear when chaos is already underway. By the time I arrived, the parking lot was a flood of flashing lights and sirens. Families huddled behind squad cars, some crying, some staring blankly. Inside, the echo of gunfire had faded to a heavy silence. Officers moved cautiously, weapons drawn, until they cornered the suspect in a service hallway. His name was Blake Thornton, 23, white, the son of a powerful local family. He had killed 5 people and wounded twice as many. And yet, when he finally stepped out with his hands raised, he was taken alive. The investigation began within the hour. I ordered every piece of evidence collected, every witness statement documented, every step recorded. There would be no sealed reports, no quiet favors, no whispered deals, not for a family name, not for anyone. Calls from city officials and well-connected attorneys came quickly. Some urged caution, others hinted at understanding the bigger picture. I ended each conversation the same way: the bigger picture is justice. We follow the law or we betray it. Still, the contrast did not go unnoticed outside the department. News anchors and community leaders asked what the public was already asking in private. How does a black teenager with a basketball end up shot in the street while a white man with an assault rifle is brought in unharmed? It was a question I couldn't dodge and wouldn't. Inside the department, the tension sharpened. Whispers started in corners and hallways. I heard Sergeant Frank Bradley's name more than once. Bradley, with his 32 years of clout, began working the edges of the room. In locker bays and late-night patrol meetups, he told officers that I was playing politics, that I protected black suspects and punished white ones. The words were poison-wrapped as camaraderie. They spread faster than any memo I could write. Some officers avoided my eye in morning briefings. Others met my questions with stiff, rehearsed answers. It wasn't open rebellion yet. It was the quiet reordering of loyalties. Then the small signs multiplied. A memo left unsigned on my desk with notes about outside agitators that didn't match any known case file. A training schedule mysteriously altered to put certain officers on overlapping night shifts. 2 late-night meetings in the break room after official hours logged only because a janitor heard voices and saw the light under the door. Each detail on its own meant little. Together, they spelled something else entirely: organization. I walked the quiet halls after midnight feeling the weight of it. This wasn't just frustration over policy. It was a network forming inside my own command, a circle that believed force and silence were the only way to hold power, and that my reforms were a threat to be removed. The mall shooting had shaken the city, but inside the department, another storm was gathering, silent and deliberate. And for the first time, I sensed that the real danger to Riverside wasn't only out on the streets. It was waiting in the shadows behind the badge. The envelope waited on my desk when I returned late that night, plain no return address, the kind of thing you'd normally hand to a clerk without a thought. But the weight of it was wrong. Too heavy for paper, too deliberate in its silence. Inside were photographs. Rachel, our daughter Kesha, both smiling in the easy light of an ordinary weekend. Across each photo, a red crosshair was drawn in thick marker. For a moment, the room tilted. The hum of the ceiling vent, the distant shuffle of night shift steps, everything fell away until there was only the sound of my own breathing. This wasn't just a threat to me. It was a promise aimed at the people I love most. Within the hour, federal agents filled the conference room. The FBI took one look at the pictures and moved fast. Protective detail, round-the-clock surveillance, secure transport. I listened as they laid out protocols, routes, signals, safe houses. When they finished, I said no. We don't hide. This department is already on edge. If I disappear behind a cordon, it sends the wrong message. Rachel met my eyes across the table, calm but fierce. You're not disappearing, she said. You're protecting all of us. This isn't about courage, Michael. It's about keeping a promise to come home. You don't fight darkness by letting it know where to aim. The room stayed quiet long enough for her words to settle. I nodded. All right, we'll do it your way. The next morning, I called a closed meeting with Lieutenant Grace, Kim Mason Cole, and Ryan Diaz. The door shut and the noise of the station fell away. Cole spoke, first voice lower than I'd ever heard it. Chief, I need to tell you something. Bradley's not just grumbling. He's been meeting with a group of ex-officers who were forced out for excessive force. They're angry. They've got weapons. And they're talking about making a statement. I let the silence stretch until even the fluorescent lights seemed to flicker softer. You're sure? I asked. I am, Cole said. I followed him once. Saw him go into a warehouse near the freight yards. Same cars outside the next night. I didn't call it in because I wanted to be certain. Diaz shifted uneasily. If they're serious, Chief, it won't be just talk. Grace's jaw tightened. We can bring in outside tactical support, but if they're inside our own network, we need a plan they can't predict. I looked at each of them. We start where this began, I said finally. The garage. They knew what I meant. The concrete bay where I'd first stood in handcuffs, the place where arrogance and bias thought they had the upper hand. Now it would become something else. We turn it into a trap built on law, I continued. We control the cameras, the alarms, the entry points. We draw them in and catch them in the act, every word, every weapon, every face recorded and admissible in court. Cole nodded slowly, a grim half-smile breaking through. Full circle, he said. The place that tried to break you becomes the place we break this. Rachel's photo with the crosshairs was still on the table, a silent witness. I touched its edge, then looked back at my team. This is where we end it, I said. No more whispers, no more shadows. We set the trap and we bring the truth into the light. The station slept under a heavy midnight hush as I left my office and stepped into the garage. The air smelled of cold concrete and motor oil, just as it had on the morning I first arrived in cuffs. Every footstep echoed off the pillars, too sharp, too alone. It felt like walking back into the moment that had nearly defined me, only this time I was carrying the plan, not the risk. Somewhere in the dark, a door clanged open. Metal scraped metal. Then shapes emerged from the far shadows. Sergeant Frank Bradley and half a dozen men, some current officers, others I recognized from old rosters long since dismissed. Their faces were pale and hard eyes, lit by something colder than anger. Weapons glinted under the flickering lights. Bradley stepped forward, first boots ringing like a challenge. You don't get it, do you? He called, voice thick with rage. You're killing the spirit of this department. Behind him, a pump-action click snapped through the air. Before I could answer, two figures broke from the side corridor. Mason Cole and Ryan Diaz, the same men who had once pinned my arms, moved fast and sure, stepping between me and the gun barrels. No hesitation. Cole's stance was steady as voice iron. You're done, Frank. Bradley's eyes widened. You, he almost spat the word. You were supposed to stand with us. We stood with the badge, Cole said. Not with hate. The standoff tightened until even the air felt brittle. One of Bradley's recruits, a young patrolman named Grant, who'd seemed neutral until now, shifted uneasily at the edge of the group. Bradley caught the movement and barked, "Stay with your brothers." Grant's hands trembled on his weapon. Cole turned his head just enough to catch his eye. "This isn't brotherhood," Cole said, calm but sharp. "This is a crime scene waiting to happen. You know it." Seconds stretched. The hum of the vents sounded like a drum roll. Then Grant exhaled, lowered his gun, and stepped back. Bradley snarled. "Coward!" "No," Grant said quietly. "I'm done hiding behind excuses." I took one step forward, voice low, but carrying. "You said I was killing the spirit of policing," I told Bradley. "I'm not. I'm saving its soul." The words settled like a weight across the concrete. At that cue, hidden cameras and mics already rolling since I'd entered fed every word and movement to the FBI and internal affairs team waiting upstairs. Floodlights snapped on with a hard white blaze. Doors on both levels burst open. Federal agents and Riverside officers poured in, weapons drawn but disciplined. Bradley's defiance broke into a curse as agents closed around him. Cole and Diaz stayed at my side while cuffs clicked tight around wrists that had carried authority for 3 decades. This time the metallic snap sounded different, a clean cord of justice, not humiliation. I looked at the men now surrounded and disarmed. "Tonight you chose fear over service," I said quietly. "The department you claim to protect will survive without that fear." No one answered. Only the echo of handcuffs and the steady voices of arrest commands filled the garage. The place where I had once been shackled had become the ground of a very different ending. The sound of chains was still there, only now it was the sound of a city reclaiming its soul. 2 years passed and Riverside did not look the same. The numbers told part of the story: violent incidents down 60%, positive community interactions up 75, crime clearance rates climbing 30. But the deeper proof lived in the everyday neighbors waving to patrol cars, kids calling officers by name, block parties where uniforms felt like guests instead of intruders. Marcus Williams became the city's quiet emblem of hope. The boy who once lay bleeding on a wet sidewalk now coached a youth basketball league, his whistle sharp and sure. Parents said he taught more than plays, he taught trust. When he invited officers to run drills with the kids, the gym filled with laughter instead of fear. On an early spring morning, I stood in the same garage where it all began. The concrete still held the echo of that first cold click of handcuffs, but now sunlight pooled where shadows used to hide. Behind me, officers and neighbors gathered in a loose circle, their faces bright with something we had built together. I took the microphone and let the quiet settle. 2 years ago, I said I was handcuffed right here, mistaken for a stranger in my own house. Today, this place isn't a trap or a scar. It's a doorway to trust, to change, to a future we create every day. A long breath swept through the crowd. I could see Marcus near the front, his basketball tucked under one arm, nodding like he already understood the next line. "Justice doesn't end," I continued. "Every sunrise brings a new test of what we believe and who we choose to be. There will be setbacks, doubts, and voices calling us back to old habits. But our duty is constant, to meet each day with courage, to keep proving that fairness is stronger than fear." Applause rose steady and warm, but I held the moment a beat longer, wanting the words to land deeper than any headline. When the gathering broke, I walked alone toward the open ramp. The first light of morning poured across the floor, drawing my shadow long and dark against the clean concrete. I thought of the men who had once tried to claim this space, of the boy who nearly lost his life, of every officer who had chosen the harder path. The work was never finished. That was the point. I stepped into the sunrise, the city waking beyond the gate, and carried with me the quiet certainty that justice is not a destination, but a daily choice, a choice I would keep making as long as the light found its way into this garage. Thank you for staying with this journey until the very end. Michael Carter's story reminds us that real justice never stops. It's built day by day through courage, forgiveness, and the will to change. It shows how one person's steady heart can turn fear into trust and transform an entire city. If this story moved you, please tap the like button and share it with friends or family who believe in hope and fairness. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful, true-to-life stories that inspire and challenge us to build a better world. Your support means more than numbers. It fuels our team to keep creating meaningful content and keeps the spirit of Mr. Max Stories alive as a home for justice, empathy, and courage. Together, we can make sure these stories of change keep reaching hearts everywhere.